Hello there, and welcome to the Tunes From Doolin Podcast, an Irish traditional music interview series presented by myself, Charles Monod, and featuring guests from County Clare and beyond who come and visit us here in Doolin. On each episode of the show, we are guided by tunes picked and played by our guests, and we talk about various topics related to traditional music, such as sources of inspiration, repertoire, style, memories, and much, much more. If you'd like to support this podcast and the Tunes From Doolin project in general, you can head over to our Patreon page, patreon.com/tunesfromdoolin, where you can sign up and choose a support level that you can sustain. It doesn't have to be much, even a cup of coffee per month really goes a long way. The link is in the show notes. Thank you so much for your support. Our guest for this episode is Mary MacNamara, the great concertina player from East Clare, who recently launched her wonderful book, Sundays at Lena's. Hope you enjoyed the tunes in our chat with Mary, and make sure to stick around till the end to know more about Mary, her music, and the book. Enjoy. Beautiful, Mary. Brilliant tunes.
Thank you, Charles.
Well, thank you, and thanks for having us here in your music room in Tulla.
Delighted to have you here at the music room.
How are you?
I'm great, and looking forward to having a chat with you and sharing some tunes with you.
Yeah, it's a great honour. Like I said in the intro, you're a wonderful concertina player, and I'm really looking forward to talk about all the local history here from East Clare. I suppose the first tunes that you played there were local tunes?
Very local, a set of jigs, which I learned from the playing of Mikey Donoghue, who features in my book. Mikey was a wonderful concertina player. He also played fiddle. Now, the man I'm talking about, Mikey, was born in 1888, and he was born in Glandreve, which is just above Tulla here, it's between Tulla and Feakle. And in 1927, he got married and moved to Bodyke, and was living beside Martin Rochford then.
Okay.
And he and Martin Rochford became great friends and played an awful lot of music together. So there are two jigs from his repertoire, and when I was doing the research for the book, we failed to find names for those jigs.
So we'll just call them Mikey Donoghue's.
Mikey's jigs, yes.
Yeah, Mikey's. The two jigs are in your new book, Sundays at Lena's, are they?
They are. The two jigs are there.
Yeah. I was lucky enough to get my hand on the book there a couple of weeks ago, and that's some amount of work you did there for local music and just Irish music in general. Do you want to tell us a bit more about how you decided to do it and the process behind it?
I suppose the whole thing has been a labour of love. It's when I started playing music at about the age of 10 years of age, and when we were playing here in Tulla, there were very few young people playing. It was mostly the older generation playing. I started some lessons with Vincent Griffin, who was teaching here in the town of Tulla, and he taught all instruments, and we went to the old boys' school there up the hill, say 2 nights a week, and learned lots of tunes, and it was great. My father had a great fondness for the music of Bill Malley and Joe Bane in particular, who lived in Glandree and Maharaban, again is between here and Fecal in the mountain area. And they used to play regularly at Fecal, often on a Sunday morning and indeed during the week as well. So my father brought us to those sessions on a regular basis to listen to these musicians playing. So we came to know them very well, and next thing we started playing with them, and eventually they became part of our musical life, and we grew to love the music.
And did your parents, did they know at the time how special these musicians were? Did they realize that there was something for you to learn from them, or is it just that they happened to be there and they were the local musicians?
No, my father knew.
Okay.
He knew what he was doing, and he was, I think he had a great sight here when he could hear what these musicians were playing. He could hear the beauty in their music. He knew it was very special, and he knew that it would be very good for us to work with these musicians. And the good thing he did, which is the result of the book, is he recorded a huge amount of our time with these musicians, which were just sessions basically, gatherings in houses sometimes. Now, a lot of noise in the recordings. It was a poor tape recorder at the time, so the recordings weren't great, but they captured the music, they captured the atmosphere. And for us, when we got older and listening back to these recordings, it even reminded us further how special this music was and the people who played it.
It's, I suppose I forgot to mention that the book actually comes with the CD with this 29 tracks, I believe.
29 tracks, and they're all samples from each of the musicians. The best we could get from the recordings, and Matt Purcell and Dara Purcell did the best they could in cleaning them up and making them. Now, there's lots of atmosphere in the music as you listen, because you can hear the fire cracking, you can hear people talking, you can hear people drinking their pints, you can hear people encouraging. As I said to somebody the other day, you can nearly smell the smoke out of the fire. Yeah. It's very...
I personally love these recordings because I think you get as much from the feeling, the atmosphere of the time when the music is played. It's not only about the notes.
It's not, no. Everything is in there. The whole lot is the atmosphere being the biggest thing.
Yeah. And obviously you always talk about your parents bringing you, plural, there. Was it yourself and your brother Andrew? Or
my brother Andrew and my older brother Peter, who has since passed away, and my sister Anita. The 4 of us would go with my father and my mother most Sunday mornings. And my father had a van because he had a travelling shop. Yeah. And at the weekends he'd empty all the food and that out of the van, and he had some nice armchairs and benches that he made, and he'd pack us all into the van, and he'd pick Joe Bane up and Bill Malley on the way to Fecal. So there was a whole ritual involved in getting there and having the tunes and coming back. So it was a day-long event, really,
It's fabulous, and I can imagine you were saying you were around 10, 11 years old at the time, so... I suppose, was that early 70s or? It was,
we would start about 1970 when we started going to these sessions.
And how old were the lads, we can call them, at the time?
See, I said this in the book, I thought they were ancient, but sure, I think Bill was probably only 62 or 3, and Bill might have been, and Joe was probably about 59.
But of course, for you as kids...
they were very old men to us. Yeah.
I think it's really this kind of relationship. It's part of the essence of traditional music. For me, coming from another country, that mix of generation, that intergenerational aspect of it is essential. It's really what makes it so special in many ways. So to hear, and I'm hoping we'll hear some other stories from when you were growing up and learning from these musicians, but the fact that you have taken the time as a labor of love, like you were saying, to put it all together in a book is really remarkable. So thank you for doing all that work.
Thank you.
One thing that I wanted to ask you is how come, so we'll talk about other musicians that are in the book, but Joe Bane and Bill Malley are together in a chapter. So were they really just always together as people when they were playing, or what's the
I love that question now, because you see, when I started doing the book, I started thinking about them all individually. I started to write about them all individually, and I just said to myself one day, I can't write about Bill and Joe apart. They were always together. We always met them together. They always played together. And so they became the first chapter naturally. I just couldn't separate them. And their music is very connected in that, as I said, they always played together. And I think the two of them in particular had a very big impact on us as young children growing up. And the fact that I think that they travelled in the van with us as well. And so we got to know them very well. So it was always Bill and Joe, Joe and Bill.
Okay.
It was never one without the other.
Yeah, that explains the common chapter.
I think so, yeah. I think they just fell naturally together into that chapter.
And so Joe played the whistle, wasn't it?
Joe played whistle and flute.
And flute, okay.
Yes.
And Bill was playing the fiddle.
Fiddle,
is that right?
yes.
Yeah, great. Before we go on to maybe talking about other people in the book, would you like to play another set of tunes for us, maybe?
Okay, Martin Rochford was another person that I've written about in the book. Martin was a fiddle player and a piper who came from Bodyke, and he had a huge impact on music. So I'm going to play a tune from Martin. It's a reel called The Old Bush. It's his version of it, and I'll follow that with The Swallow's Tail.
Okay, great. Class, Mary, brilliant. There's such different like the old bush it's another tune almost. Like you really recognize the tune, especially at the start. But I'm fascinated by these versions. And what was the second tune again?
The Swallow's Tail.
Okay, yeah.
It's debatable. Some people tell me it might be something else, but Mikey called it the Swallow's Tail.
Okay.
So I'm hoping it is.
Yeah, it did remind me a little bit of the Pigeon on the Gate.
Oh, okay, yeah. Somebody else said that to me the other day, yeah.
But at the end of the day, if Martin called it the Swallow's Tail, you have to...
Well, I found when I was doing the research for this, and it was all about listening back to the recordings that my father made, which were in a drawer for 30, 40 years. And every now and again, I'd open this drawer and say, one day I'm going to transcribe this music. Because we brought away a lot of the tunes with us when we got older and kept playing them. Mm-hmm. But they do change. You do forget them, and you need to go back and listen. And when I went back and listened to a lot of the recordings as when I was doing the book, certainly I would say they probably got some of the tunes a little bit mixed up here and there because everybody was learning by ear and people were bringing home tunes. And if they forgot something, they kind of had to make up their own little bit, add in a bit here and there. So it's quite possible that I think some of the tunes might have got a little bit.
That's how versions come about.
Exactly,
I'm assuming, because it's not like these days between TunePal and the internet and everything.
Exactly,
everything at hand. Yeah. It was completely different back then. So those were for Martin Rochford. What was your relation to him? How did you get to know him?
Well, my relationship with Martin Rochford was somewhat different. Martin could read and write music. Mm-hmm. So he had a very different approach to the music. Like he played music very similar to the way Bill and Martin played because he was very, very stylish and he played a lot of the music from East Clare. But he had great interest in putting variations into the tunes. He was a much more travelled musician than the other local musicians where he did travel outside. A lot of musicians came in to meet Martin as well. He was very well known. And so I think he had quite a broad knowledge of music outside of East Clare area. Mm-hmm. So he loved to, when he'd be teaching me a tune, he would like to teach me the tune 2 or 3 different ways.
Okay.
And that he was very keen on that. And he would always write the tune out for me and he would write it in notation. And he would write in all the different variations.
Okay. How old were you at the time?
How old was I at the time? I would have been 14 to 16 when I was learning from Martin. And at that time, I'd got my hands on a Wheatstone concertina. Like before that, I didn't have a good concertina. So this was a great opportunity working with Martin. And Martin had a great respect for the concertina. He didn't play concertina himself, but he liked it. And he was a very good friend of Connie Hogan, who was a very famous concertina player from East Galway, and who used to come down to the Black Sticks to play with Martin. So Martin took a great interest in me as a concertina player, and he taught me lots and lots of tunes. And of course, he used to love writing them out for me because he felt that if you wrote them out, wrote in the variations and that, then I must learn them the way they were. And when I'd meet him again, of course, he would always check that I got it right.
Yeah. That preservation aspect, it was probably already strong for him, apparently, to make sure that this music was passed on. Were there many other young musicians when you were growing up in the area?
No, not really. Not in this area. There was about 10 of us.
Okay.
And Martin Hayes would have been one of those.
Yeah.
But we were a very united group of young people and we all used to play together and we had a band, we had a group. And again, we were all influenced by the local musicians. And I think we were unique in our playing and unique in our band playing and our group playing as a result of that.
Do you think you were sort of like the last generation that was sort of, you didn't get as much influence from the outside world and your local community, musically speaking? It was still not, the music wasn't traveling as much as it did after your generation, maybe?
Very much so. I think we were very dependent on what was here. As you said, we didn't have much outside influence. Now, my mother came from Ennis. My father came from East Clare, my mother came from Ennis. And my mother came from a very musical family in Ennis. And she grew up knowing a lot of musicians like Seamus Ennis, Tommy Peoples, all those kind of people, Paddy O'Brien. There was always musicians coming through her house in Ennis, and she was listening to music all the time. All her brothers played music, played accordions. She herself played piano, but she was also a step dancer. Okay. But she was a woman that she was extremely musical, and everything went into her head, and she was a great singer and a great didler. She had every tune. And here, when we were kids, she taught us a lot of the music that we hadn't learned from the locals here. She would have taught us a huge amount of music through her didling. Yeah, great. And she was very accurate about that.
I actually took note because I just had a quick look at your website there before coming up here, and you wrote about your mother that her discernment in music was unquestionable.
Unquestionable.
So I really wanted to know where that came from. So she didn't play herself, but
she didn't. No, but I'll tell you, she could often would. We'd be upstairs practicing, and she'd shout up the stairs. You could be playing a tune that was probably should have had an F natural in one of the bars, and she would didle it up the stairs, and she would drop the note beautifully in her didling. Yeah. You have it wrong. This is what's missing. And the fact that she was a step dancer, I think, it was all very connected. She would sit with you in the kitchen when she'd be teaching you a tune, and she used to dance the steps as she was sitting on the chair, as well as didling, and you were learning. So it was actually a lovely way to learn the music.
And probably had strong impact on your rhythm.
Oh, huge, yeah.
Because we were just talking about our feet just before we started recording this, how important your foot tapping is. Oh, yeah. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
My feet are very important to me. I couldn't do without my feet when I'm playing. I have had bad experiences in studio over the years where mats are put under your feet, and you're taking off shoes and taking off socks and I find it very hard to play without my feet. I also like the sound. I don't like too much noise. I think it's important not to have too much noise. But for me, the response from my feet means I can get my rhythm into the concertina. I just couldn't do it without it. And I think that was probably the way I learned. The older players, we learned from their foot tap was almost like an accompaniment to their music. And if you listen to the recordings, some of the foot tapping is almost like a bodhrán player. Yeah. There's so much going on. Now it's sensitive, it's lovely, it's not intrusive in the music, but it certainly adds a huge amount to the music. And I think we learned that very, very naturally. I didn't know I had that foot tap thing until people started talking to me about it when I started going out into the open world.
Okay. Yeah, it's very interesting because, like you were saying, in older recordings, and especially it's both on the beat and on the offbeat.
Yes,
which is something that these days not as many people do it. It's to do with the lift of the music, the swing.
It does. It enhances the music.
Yeah,
hugely.
So we've talked about Joe Bane, about Bill Malley, Martin Rochford. And the first few tunes you played were from Mikey Donoghue.
Yeah.
And are we missing anyone that's in the book?
We are. John Naughton and Paddy Grogan.
Yeah. I believe John Naughton was a major influence on your playing, on the Concertina specifically.
He was, yeah. John probably I would have known the best of all of them as a friend, because when I went to live in Dublin, John had moved to Dublin. John was born in Kilclarn, just outside Fecal, and he was a concertina player, but he also played single row melodeon. So I would have met him through my younger years at the sessions in Fecal. Mm-hmm. And in 1968, when I was 9, he moved to Dublin with his family. I think it's probably about 8 children. And his wife was actually from Dublin. She was from Marino. So why they went to Dublin, I'm not really sure, but they went to Dublin possibly to do with his wife wanting to go back and live there. So I then moved to Dublin in 1978 to work. and study in Dublin in 1970. So I left home.
As a very young adult.
Yes, yeah. So John was still coming up and down. He used to come at the weekends. The whole family would come and there'd be lots of music and that. So when I went to live in Dublin then, I got to know John in another capacity altogether. We were both out of our comfort zones, you could say. John was still playing his concertina. He was hugely involved in the GEA in Dublin. He worked in Croke Park as a... What was he doing? He was working at the mattress, probably taking money and that. He also worked in the GPO as a porter, and he was very, very well known in the whole of Dublin, particularly through the Coltas Forum as a musician, and he played a lot. He was out most nights of the week playing. So he made contact with me immediately when I went to live in Dublin, and we built up another friendship, which was kind of a Dublin friendship, and we went off and played lots of music together. And I loved his music. His playing had a big, big impact on my playing. He had a great energy in his music. He had a lovely simplicity in his music. But whatever he had that ability to just turn a whole room upside down when he'd started tune. Okay. It didn't matter who was there, whether they knew anything about music or they did know anything about music. Everybody got involved. Everybody was electrified by what John did. And it was simple, but he had something very, very special in his rhythm.
Yeah, charismatic.
Yes, yeah.
And I suppose it was both in his music and in him as a person?
As a person, yes, as well, yeah.
And how long did you stay in Dublin and had that friendship with John there?
I stayed in Dublin for 18 years.
Long time.
Which was a long time. And during that time, it was a fantastic time in Dublin, because for me, when I went to Dublin, I was a very raw musician in that I only knew what I knew from here.
As we were saying earlier, you didn't have as much influence from outside of the locality.
No outside influence at all.
So tell us, what was it like to land in Dublin in the 78? You were saying. I mean, that's at the time it was all the big bands were.
Yes, it was. The body band were after taking off at the time, and music in Dublin was great. It was alive. It was big. I arrived with my concertina full of myself. I said, this is going to be great for me. I'm arriving in Dublin as a musician, and I said, I'm just going to have a great time. I think I got the biggest shock of my life. I went to the first session I went to was in the Cultural in Monkstown, which is the headquarters of Coltas. And I took out my concertina and I sat down and joined in at the session. I wasn't able to play one tune.
And the tune that you would play, nobody else would know, I would assume.
No, they wouldn't know.
Yeah.
Now, everybody was very nice to me, and I played a couple of solos on the night, but I realised, I've got to go and have a look at music again. Yeah. And my brother, who has, as I said earlier, has since died, PJ, he was a lovely accordion player, and he had gone to Dublin 2 years ahead of me. He was studying in Dublin. And we went back to the flat that night, and Peter said, Mary, you're just going to have to take another look at it. And we actually went into town the following morning. It was Saturday, and went into McCullough Pickett's and we bought O'Neill's 1001.
Yes.
Came home and started studying
Go through
the tunes that I didn't know. And bit by bit, I picked it up. And I became a big part of the music in Dublin, right throughout the city. I made friends right throughout, and I learned all kinds of tunes. I started dabbling in different styles and doing all sorts of things like that, but I was always drawn back to my own style. And if I ever was to perform at anything in Dublin, and I did on many occasions, I always did my own thing. Yeah.
And throughout that time, was John in Dublin? Did he help you with the tunes, like you were saying?
Oh, yeah. Well, every time John and I met, we'd play together. I mean, John was what we'd call a single row player. He played the C row on a CG concertina. That's what he played, which is what I would have played as well as what I would have known when I was living here. So when we'd meet, we used to play lots of tunes together. Yeah,
and for people who maybe don't play the concertina, that means that most of your tunes would have been in C, let's say, as opposed to D, which was the main.
Absolutely. Which was my big problem when I went to Dublin.
And then when did you come back?
As I said, I stayed in Dublin for 18 years, and during that time, I started out my career in life as a nurse, and that unfortunately fell through because my brother PJ, who was living with me at the time, was struck down with cancer and he died. And so I was supposed to go to England to finish my degree, and I just changed my direction in life. So I started focusing on music. I got a job in Monkstown at the headquarters of Coates, and I worked there for 5 years, and it was 5 wonderful years. I was teaching music a little bit all along in between, here and there. And then I got an opportunity with the VEC to teach at St. Joseph's School for Visually Impaired Boys in Drumcondra.
Okay.
And I worked there for 10 years, and no university would give you what I learned in that school.
That sounds like
absolutely fantastic. I started working with these visually impaired. Some of them were totally blind children. Some of them had hearing impairments. They were from all over the country because it was a boarding school, and I was their Irish music teacher, and I had the most wonderful 10 years with those boys. Yeah. And I still am in contact with some of them.
That's amazing. I can only imagine, because the importance of music for visually impaired. Like, we know of so many blind musicians and all that. So I can imagine that teaching them must have been a very rewarding experience.
Very rewarding. I felt I was learning from them all the time. I was teaching them. I taught them the music. I taught them lovely tunes. I just felt I was gaining from them all the time. And it gave me such a respect for what we have in life, an appreciation. It was an experience that I think I will never forget about. I often think about it. And playing with these musicians, I used to play with them, and I used to take them out, and we went to Slogan, we went to Flas, did concerts. It
was not only teaching music.
No, nothing stopped us. We did everything. And they enjoyed it, and the friendships were just amazing. We had a reunion there about 6 or 7 years ago, and I think I spent the weekend crying. Oh. I just met up with so many of them, and they're all such beautiful people, and a lot of them have since gone on to be wonderful people, third level education. Some of them are very, very successful now, married with their own families, but have still remember those days in St. Joseph's.
Yeah, it doesn't actually surprise me to hear your experiences as a teacher, because you're very sought after as a teacher. Like, you've a fantastic reputation for being a great teacher.
Thank you. So I think I learned a lot there.
Yeah.
Then I got married, and I had my first child was born in 1993 in Dublin. And I was really living the life in Dublin. I loved it. And I still love Dublin, and I love going back to Dublin. But we decided to move down here to County Clare, to where we are at the moment, back home.
That's going to be a perfect transition for maybe if you would like to play another tune, and then we can talk about coming back here and what life had in store for you over this side.
Okay. So this time we'll move to Bill Malley. Back to Bill. Bill, was a fiddle player, and Bill was the most amazing fiddle player, because I would describe him as careless and reckless in a lot of ways in what he did. But the beauty he had in his music is just, I've never heard it in anybody's music. Okay. He was a man for dancing. You had to get up and dance to his music. And he had beautiful dancing bow hand. So these are hornpipes. The first one is Gone Adam, because we can't find a name for it. We call it Bill Malley's hornpipe. And the second one is the Cuckoo's Nest, as Bill plays them.
Lovely. This is absolutely brilliant.
Thank you.
I love those versions, and like just saying it to the people listening to the podcast again, that's all in Mary's book, Sundays at Lena's, the transcriptions of those tunes. It just gives them another life.
Yes,
really.
yeah. It's lovely. I'm so happy I took those tapes out of the drawer.
Yeah.
You know, because it has given it a new life. It has brought it back into the system again, and I'd love to hear some people playing some of those versions again.
Yeah, I already know. I know I'm going to learn some, and I know some people who will actually. My friend Alan Reid has already done. I don't know if you saw that. He does a tune book Tuesday. He posted tunes every Tuesday from different tune books. So last week he did already a tune from Mikey Donoghue. So I'm sure, these tunes will be played. We were just talking about your time in Dublin before you moved back to Clare. It seems to be more or less did you decide to focus on music at that time? Because I think your first album, solo album, Music from East Clare, was around that time, 94?
94, exactly, yeah. Did I decide to focus on my own style?
Or music in general?
Oh, music in general.
I know you were teaching when you were in Dublin.
I was teaching, yeah. At this point, I had decided, okay, music's going to be my life. Yeah. I did make that decision. Before I moved back, I made that recording, Irish traditional music from East Clare, and I made that with Claddagh. Claddagh actually approached me to make the recording, which was nice. I had no intention of ever making a recording, to be quite honest with you, but they did approach me, and it was a lovely experience because it was my first experience at making recording, to be quite honest with you. And of course, like, they'd said to me, you can bring some guests on the album with you, and of course immediately Martin Hayes and P. Joe. They were the first two people that I thought of because I played so much music with them, and Martin and I were duet partners for years.
Because so you were kind of growing up at the same time with Martin. I know from reading Martin's book, who's also a great book that was published recently. You played together as teenagers. Teenagers,
yes.
And then when you moved to Dublin, did you manage to continue to play together?
We played a little bit, as much as we could, but Martin moved to the States, so it wasn't obviously feasible. We did do a network tour of Ireland in about, was it 2000 maybe, or 2001 or 2, I can't remember. But apart from that, it's just been a little bit here and there, a concert here and there, you know.
But every time you'd meet up, it worked.
We can play. Yeah, do you know what? We don't even have to practice. Just sit down and do it. Yeah. So when I made that recording in Claddagh, it was lovely because I went in first and did all the solo work in Claddagh, and Martin and P. Joe came up for 2 days to do their recordings with me, and it was a lovely, lovely time. They stayed with me. At the time I was living out in Ashbourne, and they stayed the 2 days, and it was lovely in the studio because I think the guys in the recording desk were kind of a little bit taken aback with our way of doing things, and we were a little bit relaxed, I suppose, about things, and there was the conversations in between the tunes and the recordings and that, whereas you might be a little bit more organised. Nowadays you wouldn't be taking it so easy, but it worked out fine, and it was a great CD, and it was actually voted album of the year that year.
Irish Times, wasn't
Irish Times, yeah.
So, that's a big deal. That's probably the biggest
I couldn't believe it when it happened.
You can get. Yeah,
it's fantastic.
And it's great to, obviously, the Claddagh knew that your music was being so different from what was in Dublin in general.
I was shocked when they asked me. Yeah, I was shocked when they asked me, because I kind of saying, "Are you sure you want me to record?" And they're saying, "Yeah, we want style."
And you know, I think the reason why I was actually listening to the album on my way down from Dublin, I put it on in the car. I hadn't listened to it maybe in a year or something, and there's that relaxed vibe that you describe in the chats you were having in the studio. It comes through so much, like it's really just
there you are.
I really love that. So congratulations. How many years is that? 94?
29
Yeah.
years. I'm going by the age of my son because I was pregnant in Portic at the time. So almost 29 years, yeah.
So yeah, then you came back to Clare and...
Yeah. Came back to Clare in... then my daughter was born. That was 95, I think she was born. We made the decision to move back to Clare. And I think at the time, a lot of our friends, there were a lot of what we call country people living in Dublin at the time, who were all around my own age group, who went up to Dublin to study, to work after leaving school. And there was such a gathering of people in Dublin at the time from all over the country. And I noticed that people were beginning to go back to their own counties. And one person who I'd spent a lot of time playing with was Brendan Begley. And he moved back to Kerry with his family. And Kevin and I decided then, we're going back.
Time to go.
And we came back here in 1995. I decided when I was here, I said, okay, right, I'm going to start teaching. And I started teaching and it went from strength to strength. Yeah. And the music now in East Clare is just so strong. So strong. Yeah. There will never be any fear of it again.
Yeah, which is such a great thing to hear. Like, 'cause I mean, it's only, like that. That's 25 years
26
ago.
years now. And I have students who are now teaching themselves, and a whole grow has developed again for the music and respect.
I mean, it's so obvious because there was even I organised some concerts there in June, and you played that one. So obviously your daughter Sorka was playing, but there was Lily O'Connor and Rosa Carroll played, and like you said, there's no fear.
No fear. All students
in Clare in general, in East Clare in particular, which is absolutely brilliant. There was one thing I wanted to ask you about, because there's an album that you recorded that I've always loved, and I can feel the connection with the book is the album you did with your brother Andrew, Open Heart, because it has all these versions of tunes. Yeah. Is there a link between the two albums? Was it?
There is a total link between the album and the book. Okay. And when we made that album, that was Andrew's creation, that whole album, because I mean, Andrew and I, all of our lives have played the music from this area, and the music that's in the book that I've put together, and the music that's in that See Open Heart. Anytime we play a concert or perform anywhere, that's what we play. And Andrew at the time asked me, will you make this album with me? And again, we went, opened the drawer and took out the tapes, and we played from those tapes on that album.
The source is actually
that's it, recordings. And the plan was to go ahead and do another album after that, because there's so much stuff there. And the plan at the time, I said to Andrew, and I am going to do a book. But it took me over 20 years to get the time to do the book, because I was too busy teaching, and
it's a huge amount of work.
Massive.
Massive, yeah. I don't know if people realise how many tunes are in the book.
I think it's 153 tunes.
Yeah, I mean, the transcriptions, from the recordings that were not always of the best quality, that takes so much time. And then I suppose sometimes you have to make decisions. As we know, transcribing Irish music is not always... were there actually? It's not straightforward. Were there times where you were actually sort of stuck?
Very stuck at times, and Andrew, my brother Andrew, was a great help to me, because he's got a fantastic ear, and he has a great memory of a lot of the tunes as well. And sometimes, if I got stuck, I'd get him to listen, and while both of us would not be able to make out what was there, he'd say, "Well, I know it was this. This is what they played." He would remember it. And in some cases that had to happen,
And I'm assuming some other people were involved. Obviously, yourself, Andrew, you just mentioned your father through recording, making those recordings. Any other people that were involved in the process
of the book?
Yeah,
putting the book. Well, I had a lot of help doing the book. I suppose the person that encouraged me to get the book going was, I have a lot of students from all over the world that come here to me on for a week at a time or maybe a month at a time to study East Clare music. So it's popular. And I'd one friend in particular, Stefan Puchalski. He's Polish originally, but he was living in Switzerland, and he's now back living in America. So he wanted to study John Naughton. And he was coming here to study John Naughton.
I think I remember you mentioned him when I had a master class with you in college. And so he helped with transcribing the John Naughton's tunes?
Well, what he did was he encouraged me to get the whole thing going.
Fantastic.
He was here, he was coming regularly. You know, he was coming 3-4 times a year from Switzerland to learn about John Naughton, to learn his tunes. Amazing. And I was teaching him the tunes, and one day he says to me, but Mary, I need more. And I said, do you know, I'm very busy. And I opened the drawer beside me where I have these tapes. I said, there's John Naughton. Will you take him home and have a listen? And he came back and he had transcribed some of the tunes and he was playing. And now to hear this man playing, you'd say it was John Naughton. He has studied him so well. I said, okay, Stefan, now that you've started doing that, I said, I'm going to keep this drawer open and I'm going to take out the rest of the recordings and I'm going to start transcribing myself. Now, I didn't have the technology on my computer to do a lot of things. So he did a lot of the laying out of that kind of work for me. He did a lot of transcribing as well, and he actually listened to some of the very difficult stuff where it was very noisy and very hard to make out some of the melody. So he did a bit of that as well. He was a great help to me, huge help.
It's great to hear that. It's a lovely backstory actually of how things came around.
Well, for him, it was the passion. Like he's coming over here in October now. We have a celebration on the 15th of October of the book in Lena's in Fecal, which is now Shorts. Yeah. And he's going to be there on the night. And I'm actually going to get him to play for the people. And close your eyes and you're going to say, that's John Naughton playing. Nice. So he just studied John Naughton so much. When it came to the fiddle music, I always wanted to get in. Apart from, I transcribed the stuff myself, but I wasn't happy that I was able to do the bowing and the double stops and all that kind of thing. So I had a friend in Galway, George Grasso, who's from California, and he's an absolute expert when it comes to this work. And he's, again, another person who's very passionate about music and loved listening to the stuff. So I said, would you take on doing this for me? So he took on the tapes of Bill Malley and Martin Rochford. And he did his own transcription and he just wrote in exactly what they're doing with their bows, which I think is very important because that tells you the style. Yes. You know, really. So he was involved in that. And David Taylor did tune research, titles, tune title research for me. And David and I have worked together for years. He's done all the artwork for my CDs and research in general. So he did tune title research for me. And of course I had Matt Purcell working on the CD recordings and that kind of thing. And my own husband was a big help to me, and my daughter and my son from helping me with computer work, which I'm not very good at. So there was loads of help in there.
That is really such a fantastic project. I suppose it's very important to tell where people can get the book these days if they want to order a copy.
Well, it's available at Custis in Ennis. It's available here from me. You can go on my website and order it through the website, and it's just Mary MacNamara .com or net. I don't know what it is.
What we'll do anyway, we'll put in the description of the show, there'll be all the links to where people can order the book. I really encourage people to get it because it's beautiful, beautiful work. Before we wrap up, I always like to ask people if they have their connection with Doolin. I came down from Dublin, and I believe you had some story with Michael Russell. I believe he really liked your playing.
Yeah, Michael and I were great friends, and I visited him in Dublin on a number of occasions. But I also met him outside of Dublin in various places. One time in Lorient at the Pan Celtic Festival. which was a very interesting week. Michael was a big name. He was a star in Irish music. People loved him. Particularly that week, I remember him saying to me, "Mary, will you sit beside me at the table? I want someone to talk to." And so I had that lovely relationship and friendship with him, and I loved to play tunes with him. We had another wonderful weekend down in Killavil with Padre Aretha himself and Tony McMahon. I think a weekend that we will never forget, because the music and the stories that weekend, very, very special. Earlo Leonard was there the same weekend. Michael was a wonderful character and always told great stories, and he was so entertaining. What good company.
And would you have known some of the musicians that are in the book?
Would he have known?
Yeah, because at the time there wasn't as much travelling.
You see, there wouldn't have been much travelling. He would have been aware of them, I'd say. Probably wouldn't have met them that. Would certainly have met Martin Rochford, I would say, because Martin travelled.
Yes.
Martin, yeah. Martin was a great friend of Junior Crehan's. Yeah. They used to meet each other. Junior used to come here to East Clare, and Martin used to go back to him in Mullock.
The reason I'm asking this is I just find fascinating how rich the pool of great traditional musicians in Clare is, and at the same time how different the styles were from here. Then you had, like you say, Ainm, then you had West Clare, then you had North Clare. Like it's quite amazing. When now it's just take the car down in an hour. Before it was a big deal.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But Mary, thanks again so much for welcoming us here in Tulla.
It was lovely to have you, Charles.
Yeah, thank you for the book, all the work that's going to be useful to so many of us. And will we play a tune before we go?
Great, yeah.
Great. Thank you, Mary, and see you again soon.
Thank you very much, Charles. Great having you here.
I hope you enjoyed this episode, and thanks again so much to Mary MacNamara for coming on the show. If you'd like to keep up with Mary and her music, make sure to visit her website, marymacnamara.net, and you can also order her new book, Sundays at Lena's, and her CDs from Costy's Music Shop in Ennis. All the links are in the description. Thank you again so much for listening to the Tunes From Doolin podcast, and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss new episodes. It would be very helpful if you could tell your friends about the show too, share it on social media, and feel free to visit the Patreon page if you would like to support. If you would like to know more about the Tunes From Doolin project, you can check out the website and YouTube channel. You can also email me at tunesfromdoolin@gmail.com. I would love to hear from you. Thanks again, and see you at the next episode.